talk is Maud Gonne's Men, and they're the men, the four men on the cover. First man here is a man called Lucien Millevoye, Frenchman, Willie Yeats in the middle, Major John MacBride, and the most important man in her life, according to me, is John MacBride. The first man in Maud Gonne's life was her father, Captain Thomas Gonne, who was born in London in 1835. The Gonnes were wealthy importers of Portuguese wines. Thomas wasn't interested in the business, and he entered the army by purchasing a commission as a lieutenant. He met Edith Frith Cook of East Peckham at Colchester, where he was based, and they married in 1865. Their first child, Edith Maud Gonne, was born on the 21st of December 1866 at Tongham near Aldershot. Edith also came from a wealthy family which manufactured and sold fabrics worldwide. Thomas was posted to the Curragh as Brigade Major of Cavalry in the aftermath of the Fenian Rising of 1867, and Maud's sister, Kathleen Gonne, was born there. Mrs. Gonne was to die prematurely in 1871 in childbirth, just 5 years after her marriage. The family moved to Howth for a year, and latterly Maud and Kathleen went to live with their mother's relations in London for 6 years, as their father was posted to different locations abroad within the Empire. Thomas was reposted to Dublin as Assistant Adjutant General at Dublin Castle in 1885. His daughters came to Dublin with him, where Maud enjoyed her position as escort to her father on formal occasions at Dublin Castle, where she was introduced to royalty. Thomas got typhoid fever and died suddenly on the 1st of December 1886 at the notoriously decrepit Royal Barracks in Dublin. Maud was 19 and her sister Kathleen 17. This was another devastating blow to the two girls. Maud always remembered two things her father had instilled in her. First, never to be afraid, and secondly, that will force could achieve anything. His body was returned to England and buried with his wife in Tongham churchyard. Once again, the two sisters went to live in London with their relatives. Now, I'll digress a little bit here. When Thomas died, it became apparent that a lady friend of his was having his child, a lady called Eileen Wilson. And in Maud's memoir for Servant of the Queen, she writes about Eileen Wilson. But the only reason I mention Eileen Wilson here now is she ended up marrying a brother of Major John MacBride, who was a TD in the First Dáil, and she turned out to be the grandmother of the poet Paul Durcan. So Paul Durcan is related to the MacBrides and the Gonnes by blood relationship. There's a whole story there that I don't want to go into. Their uncle William had earlier lied to the Gonne sisters that their father's inheritance had been lost in business transactions, and he had told them that they were going to have to take on careers. When Maud began to develop an acting career, she developed ill health. Uncle William then told the girls the truth. He told them that they were to inherit a large legacy, making them independently wealthy. Maud then decided to travel to the spa town of Royat in the Auvergne region of France with her Aunt Mary. Uncle William did not demur, but he sent Kathleen with her as a safety net. And that safety net didn't work out very well, because Maud had spotted a man that she was interested in, and she arranged for her aunt and her sister to catch a train back to Paris, leaving her alone to see this gentleman. And his name was Lucien Millevoye. He was a French nationalist and grandson of the poet Millevoye. He was married, but he was now separated. And the passion of his life was the reintegration of the national territory, the recovery of Alsace and Lorraine. Maud fell in love with him, and in order to be as dedicated as he, Maud told him, "I am Irish. England is my enemy too. She defeated Bonaparte. He would have liberated Ireland." Lucien encouraged her, saying that she could free Ireland. He told her that you can be a Joan of Arc. A woman like you can achieve anything she wants. And he said solemnly to her, "I will swear an alignment with you on this day, Maud, that we will help each other to free our countries." And Maud, dead seriously, accepted their alignment. She was to live in Paris for the next 13 years as a colleague to Millevoye's political and journalism work, because he was a French nationalist and eventually he was elected to the National Assembly, and he was also a journalist. And Maud, as I say, worked hand in hand with him, with some regular ventures to Ireland to engage in chosen nationalist events there. And she was pointed to Ireland by an English journalist whom she met in Russia, called W.T. Steed of the Pall Mall Gazette. And he told her about Michael Davitt, whom he admired greatly. He advised her to go to London to see him. She soon presented herself at the House of Commons in London and sought an audience with Davitt. He was used to dealing with many types of people, but he was immediately suspicious of this eccentric upper-class English woman who seemed to believe that Ireland's cause was naturally inimical to England. After a short discussion, Davitt handed her a ticket for the public gallery and left. Maud then follows his advice and went to London, where she stayed with the Jemison family of Donnybrook. And through one of the girls in that family, she went to a meeting of the Contemporary Club at the time. And there she met John O'Leary, and he advised her to read Irish history. She then made contact with the Land League and was advised to travel to Donegal to see the way evictions were then happening. In that part of Donegal, the local landlord was a Colonel Alfords, who was intent on getting every last penny from his tenants, or else driving them off his land. He owned everything from the seaweed on the foreshore to the rocks on top of Mushet Mountain. In Falcarra, Maud went to the local courthouse to see men being sentenced for stealing seaweed, others for stealing turf. The penalty was a fine or imprisonment, which always meant the latter for these people. Justice was dispensed in the court through English, though the people before the court only spoke Irish. with a policeman acting as interpreter. Colonel Alfords had served eviction notices to 150 households and was preparing to carry them out. This meant the literal destruction of their cabins by a force employed by the colonel. Maud abandoned her tour of Donegal and returned to Dublin to try and get the National League members of Parliament to come to the rescue. One of the tactics she put forward was the building of huts to give the evicted somewhere to stay. It was then winter and the people would not survive long in the open. In Dublin, John O'Leary's sister, a poet called Ellen O'Leary, had told Maud about a young Irish poet who was then making waves. His name was Willie Yeats. In London, Maud called to the Yeats house, where Willie fell headlong in love with her, and he wrote a poem called The Arrow. I thought of your beauty, and this arrow made out of wild thought is in my marrow. There's no man may look upon her, no man as when newly grown to be a woman, tall and noble, but with face and bosom, delicate in colour as apple blossom. This beauty's kinder, yet for a reason I could weep that the old is out of season. On the 11th of January 1890, Maud gave birth to her first child with Millevoye. When she recovered from the birth trauma, Maud was delirious with excitement. She was 23 years old and the mother of a beautiful baby with a man that she loved, though they never lived together as a couple. For a couple of months, supreme happiness reigned, but then she was determined to return to Falcara in Donegal against Millevoye's wishes. They quarrelled about it, but she went. Some months later, she got a telegram from Millevoye saying that their baby son was seriously ill. George, that was his name, had meningitis and was dying. He was just 18 months old. She insisted that an elaborate tomb be prepared for the baby's burial. The baby's death certificate dated his death on the 31st of August, but did not carry the names of his parents. Maud now decided to explore the underworld of spiritism that Willie Yeats was so versed in. Her basic motive was to establish contact with her dead infant. They conducted rituals trying to explore their past lives, which would explain their personalities. Willie introduced her to George Russell, the writer and theosophist. He believed in reincarnation, used drugs, hypnosis and meditation. Willie saw that Maud came to depend more and more on himself. This made him content, as he believed he might succeed in his mission to capture her. They travelled to London together so that she could begin a process of initiation to the Order of the Golden Dawn Spiritualists. Willie, I should say, had no idea of Maud's private life in Paris at all. In August 1894, Maud Gonne was born with Millevoye. Maud was blissfully happy. This time she did not hand her baby over to anybody else's care. She told Lucien that she would go nowhere but die with her baby. Some years later, she visited Portland Jail, where Fenian prisoners captured after the bombing campaign in England were incarcerated in dire conditions. She met with 8 Fenian prisoners, including James Egan and John Daly from Limerick. As each prisoner was brought forth from his cell, he was placed in a cage across a guarded passageway from where she was seated. The prisoners were forbidden to ask questions about the outside world. Before leaving, she promised each one of them that she would do her utmost to bring about their release. In keeping with that promise, she set up amnesty committees, spoke to various groups, pleaded with politicians, and doggedly persisted until her promise to them was fulfilled. She continued for the release of other Fenian prisoners into the late 1890s. When Maud finally returned to Ireland again in 1897, there was excitement in the political air. It was the jubilee of Queen Victoria's reign, and preparations were afoot to celebrate it suitably in Dublin. There were also committees being set up by the Nationalists to celebrate in the following year the centenary of the 1798 rebellion against the English. They saw this as an ideal vehicle to reclaim the spirit of '98. Now, Major John MacBride had gone to South Africa because gold was discovered in Johannesburg, and he was also sent by the IRB to see could he foment any trouble for the British over there. And he was joined by Arthur Griffith, and together they spent about 18 months out there. But Griffith was invited back home to become editor of the new newspaper, the United Irishman. And when Maud then got involved back in Dublin with Griffith in an organisation called the Irish Transvaal Society. John MacBride had organised an Irish brigade in the Transvaal, which was at war with the British. And Griffith publicised MacBride's exploits in South Africa, so that MacBride became a very well-known figure to Irish nationalists, very popular. And one event that Maud got involved in Dublin was called the Patriotic Children's Treat Committee. These were nationalist children who weren't invited and didn't go to the parties involved in Queen Victoria's Jubilee. So the Nationalists set up another party for those children in the Phoenix Park, and up to 30,000 school children got a marvellous party there, magnificently organised by women. Afterwards, the women decided to stay together. They were so pleased with how they had organised this on their own. And they formed a National Women's Committee. This soon was formally established as Inine Hearn, or Daughters of Ireland, of Erin, in 1900, with Maud as president. It later merged with Cumann na mBan in 1914. On her return to Paris, Paris was her home and had been her home. On return to Paris, Maud discovered that Millevoye had betrayed their alignment and betrayed her with another woman, and she decided to part from him. Iseult, their second child, was all that connected them, and Iseult knew who her father was, that Lucien was her father, and she kept in touch with him. Anna Johnson from Belfast, who founded the Sean Van Vogt with Alice Milligan, was a nationalist activist and colleague of Maud Gonne's and John MacBride. But Anna Johnson had communicated with MacBride during his time in the Transvaal and had looked forward eagerly to his return to Ireland, and those letters are extant. But when he returned from South Africa to Paris, Maud Gonne was in the welcoming party. MacBride feared that if he came back to Ireland he could be arrested and charged with treason. That actually happened to a man who later became Member of Parliament, a man called Arthur Lynch, an Australian. He was charged for treason, but he got off. Yes, Maud Gonne was in the welcoming party in Paris, as was Arthur Griffith. She later toured America on a fundraising tour with MacBride. And in 1903, Griffith's United Irishman paper carried a notice which announced a forthcoming event which has occasioned great interest and pleasure among Irish nationalists. Miss Gonne, who some time ago became a Catholic, will be formally received into the Catholic Church on Tuesday at Chapel des Dames St. Thérèse Laval, and her marriage to Major John MacBride will take place before the end of the month. This didn't go down well with Willie Yeats, as you can imagine. So he put pen to paper again, and he wrote a poem called "Oh, Do Not Love Too Long." Sweetheart, do not love too long. I loved long, and grew to be out of fashion like an old song. All through the years of our youth, neither could have known their own thought from the others. We were so much at one. But oh, in a minute she changed. Oh, do not love too long, or you will grow out of fashion like an old song. But Maud and John were soon proved to be incompatible, due mainly to her independent ways. She was an independent woman, used to doing her own thing, coming and going as she pleased. And their son then, Sean MacBride, was born in 1904, a year after they got married. And they tried to agree on custody of the baby. And they went to Maud with the baby, travelled to London. And John, who was in Ireland at that stage, came to London. And through the intermediary of Barry O'Brien, an Irish barrister, they tried to negotiate custody of the baby, where the baby should go to. But they failed. They couldn't agree. So Maud returned to Paris and sued for divorce. And it was a most bitter affair. The case dragged on to 1906, when a divorce was denied, but Maud got custody of the baby. John left Paris and never saw his son again. Maud remained living in Paris, apart from odd incursions to Ireland for particular events. And I should say, this book contains, for the very first time, the full court verdict of that divorce case. Maud felt that she had to continue living in Paris, lest John MacBride claim custody of Sean should she return to Ireland with the baby. Yeats was closely involved with Maud during this period, but at a distance. They didn't want to be seen together while the court case was pending and on. Then, when the case was complete, Yeats resumed his relationship with Maud in Ireland and France, and he wrote a famous poem called Reconciliation. Some may have blamed you that you took away the verses that could move them on the day, when the ears being deafened, the sight of the eyes blind with lightning, you went from me, and I could find nothing to make a song about but kings, helmets and swords, and half-forgotten things. They were like memories of you, but now we'll out, for the world lives as long ago. And while we're in our laughing, weeping fit, hurl helmets, crowns and swords into the pit. But, dear, cling close to me. Since you were gone, my burdened thoughts have chilled me to the bone. Maud's interest in Willie was twofold. She knew he was writing this beautiful poetry about her, and that would make her famous. And she was also interested in keeping him on tap on her nationalist work, and he did do a lot of work on nationalism through Maud. Maud became involved in nursing wounded combatants in France in the outbreak of World War I. She saw the horror of war at first hand. The Easter Rising came as a huge shock to Yeats and Maud. The news of her husband's execution had a huge effect on her. She told her son Sean, "We can all be proud to have the name of MacBride forever." She said, "He is a hero. Those who die for Ireland are sacred. They enter eternity by the great door of sacrifice, atone for all. Willie Yeats then, as you know, wrote his iconic poem, Easter 1916. Too long to quote it. Maud wrote to Willie about his poem. She says, "My dear Willie, no, I don't like your poem. It isn't worthy of you, and above all, it isn't worthy of the subject. Sacrifice has never yet turned a heart to stone, though it has immortalized many, and through it alone can mankind can rise to God. But you could never say that MacDonagh, Pearse and Connolly were sterile-faced minds. Each served Ireland, which was their share of the world, the part they were in contact with various faculties and vivid energy. Those three were men of genius. As for my husband, he has entered eternity by the great door of sacrifice, which Christ opened, and has therefore atoned for all, so that praying for him I can also ask his prayers, and a terrible beauty is born." There are beautiful lines in your poem, as there are in all you write, but it is not a great whole, a living thing, which our race would treasure and repeat, such as a poet like you might have given to your nation, and which would have avenged our material failure by its spiritual beauty. You will be angry, perhaps, that I write so frankly what I feel, but I am always frank with my friends, and though our ideals are wide apart, we are still friends. Little did she know that Easter 1916 would become probably what it has become. In 1917, Willie again proposed to Maud, as he did several times, and again she declined, and this time he asked permission from her to propose to her daughter Isolde. And he proposed to Isolde, who also, well, Maud didn't think about it, she just refused him, but Isolde thought about it for a few days, and she declined. Then Maud felt safe to come back to Dublin because MacBride was dead. So she and all her family came to Dublin with the help of Willie and became directly involved in many of the events that followed the Rising. She was jailed in Kilmainham in Holloway prison as part of the German plot with Kathleen Clark and Con Markievicz. In Holloway in 1918 she was informed of the death of Lucien Millevoye. Luckily Maud was released early due to ill health because the three women just couldn't abide each other. In December 1918, Markievicz was elected to the Dáil. She wrote to her sister Eva, saying, "I thought there might be a congratulatory note from Maud Gonne MacBride this morning. I have heard nothing from her since her release a few months ago and feel quite snubbed. Perhaps she has gone to France to recuperate and is not yet aware of my good news. I hope she will not be too jealous. We all know how she loves the limelight. I mean, what possessed her to nurse those silly Irishmen in France who choose to defend the corrupt, capitalist British Empire rather than fight for a free Irish nation? She would have proved her mettle if she'd come home to fight alongside our brave Irish soldiers in their revolt against our English enemy." On her release, Maud became involved with the White Cross, which was established for distributing funds for prisoners and their dependents raised by the American Committee for Relief in Ireland. She remained very close to Arthur Griffith and supported the treaty and was appointed by him as an official representative to the Irish Race Convention in Paris. And it was during that convention that she heard that her son Sean, who was an active IRA member by then, was one of those captured in the Four Courts by the Free State Army, and he was in danger of being executed. Sean had unsuccessfully tried to get his mother to oppose the treaty publicly. He wrote, "Mother was at that time very much in favour of the treaty. I could well understand her point of view. Most of her lifetime, the struggle had been largely for Home Rule. To Mother, this looked like a tremendous step forward. I feel we should have gone further, so Mother and I fell out over this." But Sean's imprisonment led her to set up a women's committee to send 2 delegations to end the hostilities. This was a failure and led to Maud gradually changing sides on the treaty. Now, W.B. Yeats, as you probably know, was on the Free State side and a senator. And Nancy Cardozo writes, "For more than 10 years, Maud refused to see Willie, even after he left the Senate. His support and semi-official association with the Free State enraged her." And Willie again put pen to paper, telling us what it was like for him in a poem called "Quarrels in Old Age." "Where had her sweetness gone? What fanatics invent in this blind, bitter town, fantasy or incident, not worth thinking of, put her in a rage. I had forgiven enough that had forgiven old age." Maud then joined her son in opposition to the new government, setting up the Women's Prisoners Defence League and remaining an outsider anti-treaty activist, together with Charlotte French Despard and members of Cumann. She was jailed in Mountjoy and Kilmainham in 1923. Her house in Roebuck and Clonskea became a centre for refugees and ex-prisoners. The assassination of Kevin O'Higgins in 1926 saw John MacBride arrested and in danger of execution. Yeats tried to act as an intermediary with the government, and Maud wrote to him, "The Free State now punishes those who fought England and honours ex-black and tans. Of course, Sean and I are Republicans. Ireland has a right to be independent. You believed that once long ago. But what is the use of writing this long letter to you, who by your vote made yourself responsible for the Public Safety Act and put police above the magistrates and made law mockery and derision? In the Public Safety Act, the Free State legislators have given their measure. They will be remembered by it for all time." In 1932, Maud applied for a state pension as the widow of John MacBride. She was awarded £22 in 1933 after she provided her marriage certificate. Her award was cut as she had not applied under the new 1923 Act. She later received £67 and 10 shillings rather than £90. After a new military pension law was passed in 1937, she received an increased payment as Maud Gonne MacBride. During the Second World War, with the IRA campaign in full swing, prison conditions were shocking, with hunger strikers at the Curragh going naked for months. The prisoners claimed political status, but the government treated them as criminals. The most infamous case surrounded Sean Mackay, whom Sean defended. Maud wrote to the press, "Sir, those unable to serve can demand nothing. Therefore I, who am almost 80 and bedridden, make my last request. I make it to the people and to the government. Let no more young lives be sacrificed to uphold an old British rule of Victorian origin. Be speedier than death in releasing young Mackay. Please, with him release the others from Portlaoise jail, who have been fighting that old British rule with the same spirit of courage and endurance which liberated 26 of our counties, and among them is the son of our comrade Lord Mayor McCurtain, who dined for Ireland and trusted his own children to her care. Only then, when it is done, can our government and people unitedly, without hypocrisy, demand that the ill treatment of prisoners in our 6 occupied counties shall cease. John MacBride then became Chief of Staff of the IRA during the war years. As the De Valera government became unpopular, John MacBride decided to seize the political initiative by setting up a new party, Clonapoblochta, in 1946, to galvanise Republican support against the government. A massive release of prisoners was mounted. The IRA said it would expel any of its members who joined the new party, which won 2 sensational by-elections. John MacBride, accompanied by his mother, entered Leinster House to take his seat in an Irish Parliament. It brought to her mind how she had accompanied Lucien Millevoye to take his seat in the Chamber of Deputies in Paris more than 50 years earlier. De Valera then panicked. He called a snap election and lost. Clonapoblochta, with 10 seats, helped to form a new coalition government with its bitter enemies from the first Free State government. Maud Gonne MacBride kept her own counsel as Sean MacBride became Minister for External Affairs. One of the hallmarks of the new government was to demonstrate, I quote, its filial loyalty to the Holy See, just as De Valera's government had done following the example of the Cosgrave governments. Sean MacBride played an important role in the repatriation of W.B. Yeats in 1948, making it an interstate event. He had personal and familiar reasons for doing so. As you know, James Joyce died in 1941, and at that time Nora Barnacle did her best to try and get his body repatriated to Ireland, but failed. But when Yeats's body was repatriated in 1948, she thought there might be some hope of that happening. Incidentally, when she was rebuffed in 1941, the Minister for External Affairs was Eamon de Valera. And in 1949, the matter came officially before the new coalition government of Taoiseach John A. Costello. And as Sean MacBride, as Minister for External Affairs, refused to support the move, a note on the file says, and I quote, "No action to be taken." So Joyce was rejected again. I should say there's a chapter in this book on the repatriation of Yeats and a chapter in on the non-repatriation of Joyce. Maud was in old age and largely bedridden. Before she died, she requested her daughter Iseult to give her George booties from her handbag and to make sure they remained with her. She died on the 27th of April 1953, aged 86 years, after receiving the rites of the Catholic Church. She is buried in Glasnevin Cemetery among her colleagues and friends, together with Sean and his wife Catalina Bulfin and their son Sean Tiernan MacBride. Thank you very much.